All right, how's everybody doing today? Great. So welcome to UX Does Not Equal UI, a harrowing saga of romance, danger, and unlocking your car. Before we get started, I just want to say I'm so excited to be here with you all today because, we're only 3 talks in and we've already learned a whole lot of really cool stuff. Everybody here likely saw Julia talk about the future of technology and hardware. And for those of you who went to Jay Vaglio's talk, we learned a lot of really interesting information about the legacy at IBM and how the design culture there rose and fell and is rising again. So my talk to you all today is about going beyond the interface and creating a better product by focusing on your user's goals instead of on the screen. My name is Evan Youngblood, and I'm an interaction designer on our user experience team. And we're going to cover 4 basic topics today. We're going to look at the interface as an industry obsession. So basically, our industry, the tech industry, has become obsessed with user interfaces, and we're going to look at the causes of that. We're also going to look at how interface-driven technology can actually make our lives more difficult rather than easier. Thirdly, we're going to look at the benefits of goal-oriented design versus screen-oriented design. And finally, we're going to look at how you can engage in your day-to-day role in goal-oriented design. But first, I have a confession that I want to share with you. I believe that user interfaces are evil. They're a necessary evil, but they're still evil. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking to yourselves. This is a UI guy, and if he thinks user interfaces are evil, then he's either masochistic or he's probably not on the right career path, right? But if you walk away from this talk with only one thing today, make it this. A user's interaction with the system starts way before the UI, and that by focusing our thoughts, strategies, and design decisions around the UI, we're actually making a pretty big mistake. To illustrate this, let's play a little game. By show of hands, who in this audience believes that a link would be considered part of a user interface? Okay, go ahead and keep your hands up, and it's not a trick question, so hopefully everybody has their hands up right now. I'm going to go over a list of other things, and if I say something that you do not believe is part of a user interface, I want you to go ahead and put your hand down. So next, who thinks that a data table would be considered part of a user interface? What about a keyboard? If you do not believe that a keyboard is part of a user interface, I want you to go ahead and put your hand down. What about a microphone? What about the user's hand? Could that be considered part of the user interface? Finally, what about the user's brain? Now, what I'm getting at here is that while we may have a specific idea of what constitutes a user interface, the screen is actually a very small part of what allows a user to take an action in a system. That interaction starts all the way up in the user's brain, and that gets passed through the body, through the input device, and into the system. So if the screen is the last part of this whole structure, why do we treat it like it's the first? Now, as an interaction designer, I'm a big fan of why questions. You can ask some of the teams I've worked with. Sometimes I ask so many why questions that it gets kind of weird and philosophical, and by the end of it, you don't even really know who you are anymore. But to me, the biggest why question of them all is why, in a user's brain, do they decide to take an action in a system, no matter what that action is and no matter what that system is? And the answer to that question is that user has a goal that they're trying to achieve. Goals drive action, and it's those goals that we should be focusing on as designers, developers, and strategists. Now, this seems pretty simple, right? But I would argue that the tech industry at large really seems to miss the mark in this regard. They've become so focused in features and UI that I actually believe that a lot of people think that UX and UI are the same thing. And this is a thought process that we need to eradicate as quickly as possible because it's hurting the products that we make. It's gotten to the point where the default answer to the question, how do we improve this product, has become, let's add an interface. We saw Julia's example of the Pandora-enabled refrigerator earlier, and I almost fell out of my chair when she gave this example because I actually have the exact same example with a Twitter-based refrigerator. When was the last time you were getting milk out of the fridge and thought to yourself, man, I really want to look at my Twitter feed like right now? I don't even want to get my phone out of my pocket because we all have Twitter in our pocket 100% of the time. So the next question is why? Why is the tech industry obsessed with user interfaces? And that's a couple of reasons. The first of those is marketing. Marketing is about making a product easier to sell and not necessarily easier to use. They don't always see eye to eye, but they're not always in conflict either. Now, Asa Raskin, who's the lead designer of Firefox, put it best when he said, to the user, the interface is the product. So if I work in marketing and I know that users think interfaces are products, then it makes sense to me to focus on the interface because I want to sell products. Now, I've worked in marketing for a few years, and I can tell you that it's not the real issue here. I mean, selling stuff is crucial to any business. The second problem, and the one that I'd like to focus on today, is the law of the instrument. Now, by show of hands, is anybody here familiar with this law? Okay, so maybe one or two people. The law of the instrument was given to us by Abraham Maslow in the early 60s, and it can be basically boiled down to this thought. When all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So let's take a look at let's take a look at this quote in context. Basically, we have this tendency in any business to fall into this way of thinking where we believe that we can solve any problem that comes our way with the same tools that we used to solve any previous problem. We do this for a couple of reasons. First, it's easy, right? We don't have to learn a whole lot of new stuff, and we don't have to shift our way of thinking in any significant way. The second reason is that it tends to be less risky. These tools are already proven and established by solving this problem over here, so it goes to reason that they could probably solve this new problem in front of us now. Businesses, and especially shareholders, are risk-averse. They don't like risk, and so this line of thinking does make some sense. But what we often fail to realize is that the tools we have with us right now are not always the best one for solving the problem at hand. This is especially true in technology where new life-changing innovations are coming at us at a rate we never thought was possible before. With interface-driven technology being so ubiquitous, it can be very difficult for us in the tech industry to admit when it's not meeting our needs and helping our users reach their goals. So I actually have a little bonus topic in here for you. We talked a little bit about why our industry is obsessed with user interfaces, but we haven't really talked about why I think interfaces are evil. And first, I realize I'm being a little overly sensationalist here. I mean, it's not like they're kidnapping our children, and it's not like they're trying to take over the world, right? The second point could be argued. But user interfaces are evil because they are an obstacle between our user and their goal. They act as gatekeepers that tell our users what actions they're allowed to take and when in any given situation. And if we're designing our software or whatever it is we're designing, products, solutions, what have you, if we're designing those around goals, like I mentioned earlier, we should be getting rid of those obstacles wherever possible. Think of it this way. A user interface is actually a lot like a claw machine. It creates an indirect route between a user and their goal, in this case, via the control panel and the claw. Now, the challenge of getting the object is part of the game of a claw machine, but if we take the game out of the picture, this would be an incredibly frustrating experience for somebody who just wants to retrieve a basic item. It would look a little something like this. The user would walk up to the claw machine and they would try to use it, and they would fail. And they would keep trying and they would keep failing, and eventually they would get really frustrated with the claw machine. They would get angry and they might say something like, "This claw machine won't let me get the object." Or they might eventually just give up and say, well, I'm not very good at claw machines anyway, and I didn't want the toy that bad. If we look at this sequence of events, right, the user approaches the claw machine, they attempt to use the claw machine, things go wrong, user gets angry with the claw machine, user decides I'm not good at claw machines. If we take every instance of the phrase claw machine and change it to computer, that look like a conversation you had with a non-tech savvy relative lately? Because it looks like one I've had. This is the challenge that everyday people have to go through when they deal with interfaces that don't exist to serve their goals. So what we should be doing is removing those obstacles wherever possible. In this example, that would mean taking away the claw and the instruments and the glass panels around the teddy bear, allowing that user to get to the teddy bear as quickly and as easily as possible. So this seems pretty ridiculous as an example, right? I mean, we all know that a claw machine is not the best tool for retrieving basic objects, at least I hope we do. And it's not the tool that we would choose to use for the job. But I would argue that the interface trap is far more insidious than this. This is especially true when we think about smartphones. We have apps, right? And smartphones are now in basically everybody's pocket, and they make our lives better and easier in ways we never thought were possible before. We've fallen into this way of thinking, though, that no matter what your problem is, it should be solved by an app. We see this everywhere. My favorite example of this was given by a guy named Golden Krishna, who at the time was a designer for Samsung. His example of this was the My BMW Remote app, and it's made by BMW for owners of BMW automobiles, and it allows you to do things like lock and unlock your doors and honk your horn and turn your headlights on and off. At first thought, this actually seems like a pretty cool idea, but let's consider it in context. I want to get in my locked car, and as a lucky owner of a BMW, I have this app to make my life quicker and easier with the wonders of technology. So I'm going to walk up to my car, and I'm going to pull my phone out of my pocket. Now, since I spent all my money on a BMW and I don't have a 5S yet, I'm going to slide to unlock, and I'm going to enter in my passcode because this thing is effectively a key to my car. Next, I'm going to look through this sea of icons and try to find the one for the BMW app, and I'm going to tap on it. At this point, I'm presented with a map of the United States, which is confusing enough in its own right, but I'm looking to unlock my door, so I'm just going to forget about that, and I think I'm going to tap Control here. Can't be certain, but my guess is that's where it'll be. Okay, cool, so it looks like I made the right choice. I'm looking to unlock my car, so I'm going to tap Locking and Unlocking. And now I get this little slider at the bottom. So I'm looking to unlock my car, so I'm probably going to move that slider towards the unlock icon. At this point, the app does stuff, and oh cool, it says data transfer successful. So I guess that means my car is unlocked? I can't really know for sure. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and try to open my door, and it opens. Thanks, technology. So let's take a look at how most of us do this today with remote keyless entry on our vehicles. I want to unlock my car, and as a non-lucky, non-owner of a BMW, all I have is this stupid keychain remote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach the car. I'm going to pull my keys out of my pocket. I'm going to find the unlock button, and I'm going to press it, and then I'm going to get in my car. At this point, I probably feel bad that I didn't get to use my smartphone. Finally, let's look at one of BMW's primary competitors, Mercedes. In the late 90s, Mercedes came out with a key that has a chip in it. And the car has a sensor such that when I approach my car and put my hand on the handle, it'll sense whether or not the key is nearby and automatically unlock my doors for me. So in this scenario, it looks a little bit more like this. I approach the car, and I unlock the door. Excuse me, I open the door. The doors unlock automatically. Now, this is a fantastic example of goal-oriented design versus screen-oriented design. What I've done here is I've highlighted everything that involves an interface in orange so you can see all the additional steps that screen-based thinking gave us. And if you compare the BMW example to the Mercedes example, I can tell you which one I would probably want to go with. Now, I want to use this example to talk about something we use frequently as interaction designers, and that's referred to as the interaction cost. So basically, the interaction cost tells us that we can measure the cost of a user's action in a system in terms of the mental processing and time it takes for them to take that action. Now, in most scenarios, we want the interaction cost to be as small as possible. So if we take a look at the car examples from earlier, we can see that the BMW example has a much higher interaction cost than the Mercedes example or even the remote keyless entry most of us use today. This is important because every interaction in a system, no matter how small it is, has a cost associated with it. And this is particularly relevant to us. We see something interesting happening with interaction costs in a healthcare environment. Basically, the interaction costs of using our software have been offloaded onto new employees because they're hiring in scribes to manage the software for the physicians. What this means for us is that our interaction costs are so astronomically high that they're equating to literal costs for our users and our clients in the form of having to hire in new employees. Now, I read a few articles in regard to this trend, and one of them in particular used some language that I'd like to share with you. This article was the New York Times, and the first quote was, "Liberated from the constant note-taking that modern EHRs require or demand." The second quote was, "EHRs have become a disease in need of a cure, as physicians do their best to treat patients while continuously feeding the data-hungry computer." The third quote was, "Doctors negotiate a cranky truce between talking to and examining the patient and the ceaseless demands of the computer." And finally, the fourth quote from this article was, "Chronically exhausted and feeling enslaved to the computer." Now, I realize that the New York Times wants to sell stuff like this, and so they're probably being sensationalist to get a reaction and sell articles, right? But perhaps unintentionally, they're pointing out a really interesting trend, and it's one that we should pay attention to because it's a problem. And that's that in this scenario, our users are serving the computer instead of the computer serving our users. This is indicative of what I like to call an unhealthy interaction structure. An unhealthy interaction structure is what you get when you focus your decision-making and your execution around features and user interface. And the opposite of that, of course, is a healthy interaction structure, which is what you get through goal-oriented design. Let's look at a healthy interaction structure first so you can get an example of what it looks like. A healthy interaction... there's another slide in there. A healthy interaction structure can be thought of as a pyramid, where every level serves the level below it. On the bottom level of this pyramid, we have the user. And this makes sense, right? This is where we get ideas like user-centered design. This is who we're making the product for, so they form the base of our pyramid. Above that level, we have the user's goal. And the goal serves the user in that the user intrinsically believes that achieving that goal will improve their circumstances. That's why people have goals, and that's why they take actions to complete them. Above that level, we have features. And features can be thought of as the series of tasks within a system that allow a user to achieve a goal. This is something that we would often think of as functional requirements, but what I want you to focus on in this example is that features only exist to serve goals in a healthy interaction structure. Finally, at the top of this pyramid, we have the user interface. And this offers a point in the system at which a user can activate or deactivate a feature. So in this structure, we have the user interface serving the features, which serves the goal, which serves the user. Products that get this right and build this interaction structure around these principles have one of two things happen to them. Either the users become fanatical supporters of the product and they do things like get the logo tattooed on their bodies, or nobody talks about them at all. Nobody talks about them because they've become so ingrained in our daily lives that we fail to realize that they're there anymore. Think about automatic doors at your grocery store. I mean, unless you're pretending to be a Jedi, you don't even realize you're there. They're there, excuse me. You just walk into the grocery store and get your groceries. Now, I want to illustrate a healthy interaction structure for you using a coffee shop as an example. Now, in this coffee shop, there's a patron named Bob. And as Bob enters the coffee shop, a sensor scans his pocket in which he has a smartphone that has an app. That app has his picture and his name and his order history and his payment information tied to it. It can tell the users of the system things like, when was the last time he was in this establishment? What kind of things does Bob typically get when he comes in here? That gets brought up on a screen in the back, where the barista finds that 98% of the time, Bob gets a latte. I mean, we're all creatures of habit, right? This is pretty common. That barista is immediately able to start making that latte while Bob waits in line. I plan on patenting that latte machine at some point. So, back to the front of the coffee shop, as Bob waits in line, he eventually gets to the front of the line, where another sensor scans him again and brings that same information up to the person working behind the cash register. This does two things. First, since his name is brought up, they're able to immediately address him by name and welcome him into the establishment. Studies show that people who are addressed by name report higher customer service satisfaction than those who do not. So Bob's already having a great day just because of this. The second thing that happens is that since his photo is tied to this becomes a very secure transaction. Think of those debit and credit cards we see that have photos printed on them. That's for a reason, right? Nobody who's not Bob is going to be able to buy things with this system. So the next thing that happens is that Bob's latte is already done by the time he gets to the front of this line. And much like our claw machine person, he's also very happy because he's immediately able to take that latte. He smiles and says thanks and tells the cashier to take $1 for a tip, at which point the cashier taps a single button. It's a giant button. It says, "Charge this guy for the thing he always gets with the tip he always gives." Now, if we think about Bob's goal here, his goal is to walk into this coffee shop and get a cup of coffee. And by using smart background technology, we were able to eliminate all the extra steps that get in the way of this goal. He doesn't have to pull his wallet out. He doesn't have to sign anything. He doesn't have to pull his smartphone out of his pocket and hold it against some black box until it beeps with near-field communication. He doesn't even have to say the word latte because the system is smart enough to know what it is that he's going to do. So that's a healthy interaction structure. Let's look at an unhealthy interaction structure. In this example, we have features and UI. That's what we focus on because we have to know how this thing is going to look and what this thing is going to do. Unfortunately, often, if goals are considered at all, they're in passing. We wave at them as they pass by and we get focused on the work that we should be doing. And what's unfortunate about this is that we leave the user to bend around a UI and a feature set that hasn't been put together with their goals in mind. In this example, you have a user serving the UI and the features instead of the other way around. What you end up with in a system like this is a lot of bricks, but no building. That stupid animation took like 10 minutes. So, moving on forward from here, the next question is how? How do I get engaged in goal-oriented design? How do I reduce or even remove the user interface? And how do I go about crafting a good goal-oriented interaction structure? And there's really 4 ways that you can go about it. The first is to know your user because they're not you. The challenge of goal-oriented design is that we all have different goals, right? I mean, you have different goals and dreams and desires from the person sitting next to you, and you have different goals and dreams and desires from that person over there and that person over there, and I could do this for everybody, but it would take a while. So how do we design something that meets your goals as a unique individual? And we really have two options. First is that this means you can't just talk to one person. You have to talk to lots of people. And in doing that, you can begin to see patterns and analyze those patterns and really see what comes out of it. We can begin to group goals into categories and figure out how many of our users have a specific goal in mind and what is that specific goal. Takeshi Toyoda of Toyota Motor Company, or it was actually Toyota Industries, which later became Toyota Motors, gives us a technique called the 5 whys technique. And that technique is basically used to solve problems whereby we ask the question why over and over again. And in doing that, he used this as a problem-solving structure where we could learn more and more about the base roots of a problem. And once we learn that information, we can stop the problem before it even happens. We're not creating Band-Aid solutions to cover up this issue that we have every single day and make it hurt a little bit less. We're keeping you from getting the cut in the first place. This is a great way to solve problems, and it's also a great way to learn about your users' goals. I mentioned earlier that I'm a big fan of why questions, and this is the reason why. Also, in the kind of know your user category, we can create smart learning technology that can know our user for us. Think of a product like Nest, right? It's a thermostat that sits in your house, and as you adjust the temperature in your house, it will learn what you're doing. So it will learn things like when you go to bed and when you wake up. What temperature do you like it to be in the morning versus the afternoon? And over time, as it learns that, it will begin automatically changing the temperature of your house to reflect those needs. With that in mind, the second thing we can do is embrace hardware. And I'm so glad that Julia talked this morning because that was kind of what her whole talk was about, right? It was hardware is kind of the future in technology. So there's all kinds of sensors out there. There's sensors that measure everything from light to sound to movement to things as specific as blood oxygen levels. And when we put those together in a smart way, the possibilities are basically endless. Think of a chip in a patient's wristband that as I approach with a workstation on wheels or a WOW or an iPad or a cell phone, it automatically knows whether or not I have access to this patient's chart and can bring it up for me without having to do anything. Now, opening a chart is a pretty basic action, but if we think about how often our users have to open charts in a given day, I'm confident that this would save them hours a week. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, and that's that, Evan, that's great, but that's entirely overly optimistic. We're a software company. Julia talked earlier about software people versus hardware people, and we're kind of a company of software people. So we don't make hardware, we don't make sensors. Why are you talking to me about this? It's something that I can do. And I would say, yes, technically that's the case, but that's also just an excuse. I mean, Goodyear's a tire company, and they've come up with a sensor that not only measures your tire pressure, but can also automatically activate a pump that will reinflate your tires for you while you're driving. So there's two options here. I mean, we could tell the user that their tires are low, and they could go to the gas station and put quarters in a machine and feel bad that they're paying for air. And then they could get out of their car, out of the air conditioning on our wonderful Kansas City summers, and they could hook the air up, and they could continue using that, right? Or we can inflate their tires for them without them ever having to do anything. And this saves you money on fuel, and this makes it safer for you to drive because you're less prone to things like skidding or water planing or anything like that. Third is to ruthlessly question your decisions. Question why you're putting a feature in there. One of the greatest things about goal-oriented design is that it gives us a solid frame of reference for us to bounce ideas off of. So I can ask myself things like, does this feature serve this goal? Because if not, I should probably get rid of it. Must a user interact with this feature to get it to do what they'll want? When you can, try to strive to use an interface just as a backup instead of as the primary way to take actions. We can allow the user to manipulate things when they're not quite working the way they would expect, but we can also try to meet the user halfway or 75% of the way or 95% of the way. And just bring your user closer to their goal. That's one of the wonders of technology, is that we can actually take those goals that exist in real space and bring them closer to our users. Finally, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, practice. Goal-oriented design, just like anything else, requires practice. As a thought experiment, try to see if you can solve a problem that you're working on right now with no user interface at all. Now, what you'll come up with is, for complex problems, what you'll probably come up with is something that's probably a little bit wacky and convoluted and not really that useful when it's all said and done. But what will happen is you will see possibilities that I can guarantee you haven't been considered yet. You really have to push yourself beyond your comfort zone to help users meet their goals. Now, I realize that a lot of the things I'm saying are very difficult. Goal-oriented design is intrinsically very hard. But what I will tell you is that it's totally worth it. We shouldn't be making our lives easier at the expense of our users. And I fully realize that with the current state of technology and with the current state of healthcare, it's not really possible for us to just completely remove user interfaces. I don't want you to go around deleting all your front-end code just because the UX guy said that interfaces are bad. Please don't do that. But what we can say is that, we really have to focus on our users' goals. And in doing so, we'll have the right things in mind. I think this is especially relevant for us. Think of it this way. If you're a doctor, what matters more to you? A sick patient or an interface? Now, it's kind of unfortunate that I'm breaching this subject to you or talking about this subject from the lens of a designer, right? Because everybody in here can have a huge positive impact on our culture and on our products by aligning ourselves more closely with our users' goals. This could just as easily be goal-oriented strategy or goal-oriented development, but unfortunately, a designer is the one who submitted this talk, so I'm up here now. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with a couple of quotes. The first is from Don Norman, who's often referred to as the father of user experience. And he said that the problem with an interface is that it's an interface. Interfaces get in the way, and I don't want to focus my energies on an interface. I want to focus on the job. The second quote is from Golden Krishna, who I referenced earlier in the South by Southwest example that talked about BMW and Mercedes. This is a really smart dude, and a lot of his concepts and a lot of his examples I've borrowed to make this presentation today. And his quote is, "Good experience design isn't good screens. It's good experiences." So thank you very much. I think we have just a few minutes left for questions, about 5 to be exact. So if you all want to come up and ask me any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Also, please don't forget to rate me. -1 if you didn't like the talk, a 0 if you're a neutral, or a +1 if you're smart.